In the last video, we finished off the top of this workbench by installing this tail vise or wagon vise. In this video, we're going to start working on the base for this workbench. The plans for this workbench call for legs which are 120 millimeters wide by 90 millimeters thick. And as that's not exactly a standard size, we're going to have to make up these legs by laminating smaller pieces together. The stock I recommend you use is 120 by 45 millimeter pine, which you just laminate together so it gives you a 90 by 120 millimeter leg, and that's what I've done for my bench. Now 120 by 45 can be difficult to find, so if you can't get your hands on it, the other thing you can do is actually laminate 3 pieces of your standard 90 by 45 together, and that will give you 90 by 135. So you will have to mill it down to come to 120, but it is a good alternative. Now to speed this video up, I went ahead and I laminated my legs together yesterday. Now, all that consisted of was cutting down my 1.8 metre length of the 120 by 45 to be about 900 millimetres long, and then jointing one face of each of those pieces I just cut, and then gluing them together in pairs. And then once the glue was dry, I went ahead and took all 4 legs to the S4S, or square 4 sides, by joining one face and then one edge. I then sent them through the thickness planer to bring the opposing faces to be square and parallel. So what that has left me with is these 4 legs here, which are all the same size, they're all square, and they're ready to be worked with. Now, looking at the plans, we can see that we have 2 leg assemblies. Now, they consist of the 2 legs, the upper short rail, and the lower short rail. Now, the upper short rail is made from 90 by 45 millimeter stock, or your standard 2x4, and in the plans, the lower rail is made from the 120 by 45, so the same stock that we used for the legs. But if you are unable to find 120 by 45, you can definitely get away with using your 2x4 or your 90 by 45, or well, whatever size you can find really, as long as they look right to you, go ahead and use them. And on top of the 2 leg assemblies, we also have the 2 long lower rails, but we'll look at them a little bit later on. Okay, so to start the base assembly, we need all 4 legs to be the exact same length, which in my case is 835 millimeters. So what we'll do is we'll square off one end, flip it around, install the stop block on our table here, and we'll cut them to the exact same length. We also need to cut 2 upper and 2 lower rails, but before we can do that, we actually need to find out the final size, because the plans, they're only a rough guide, so the way we do that is using relative dimensioning. To figure out the final size of our rail, it's fairly simple. We need 2 measurements. We need the measurement of the bench, which in my case is 645, so that's 5 millimeters smaller than the actual drawing or the plans. And we also need the measurement of the 2 legs when they're ganged together with the narrower side facing up. And that in my case is 175, so they're also a little bit undersized. So what we do is we take 175 from 645, and that leaves us with 470, and that is the length of our rail without the tenons. So all we have to do there is add 110 onto that number, and that will give us a 55 millimeter tenon on either side. So all up, we need 580 millimeters. Okay, so with all 4 legs now the same size, let's put a tenon on the top of them. So what we want is a 25 millimeter long tenon with a 20 millimeter shoulder on all 4 faces. So there's a lot of ways you could cut this tenon. One way would be at your table saw with a dado stack, or even a normal blade really. Just set the depth of cut to 20 millimeters and cut away to that shoulder on all 4 faces. Another way would be just using your hand saw. So saw on those shoulder lines and break it away with the chisel and you'll be set. It's a very easy tenon to cut with hand saws. Or the other way is the same way that I did the dovetail. Use the bandsaw for the majority of the cuts and then just clean up the shoulders with a hand saw. You might have noticed that these short rails look a little bit too short when I cut them down, and that's because I haven't allowed for the 55 millimeter tenons. Now the reason for that is because I'm going to be using a cool tool that I have access to called the Festool Domino XL. I do need to say that this isn't a sponsored message from Festool or anything. Now if they want to sponsor the show, hey, I'm willing to talk. But keep in mind, a tool like this will set you back close to $2 grand, so it is out of reach for most hobbyist woodworkers. Now, if you weren't aware, the Festool Domino is a handheld loose mortise and tenon joinery system that's capable of cutting mortises for little tiny tenons like this one, or otherwise known as dominoes. This is 8mm thick by 40mm long, but you can go as small as 30mm, all the way up to a tenon this size, which is 14mm thick by 140mm long. So a tenon like this is perfect for big benches like this one, and also things like doors. So you can really get some serious joinery action with this. Using a domino is pretty much the same as using a biscuit joiner, only a lot stronger. So you get your workpiece and you actually position it on your board exactly where you want it to be. So in this case, it's flush with the top rail here, or top of the leg, I should say. And once that's in position, you just mark where you want the mortises for the dominoes to be cut. And then once you've got your joinery marked, you just set the depth of your domino machine to be cutting where you want it to be. So for me, that's about 22, 23mm. And then it's used just like a biscuit joiner, where you line up the lines you just marked with the centre line on the machine and plunge in. So I just cut all of the joinery for this first leg assembly in under 5 minutes. That's how quick using a system like this is. Now, the dominoes we're using are going to be these big ones here, so the 14mm by 140. So that means we're going to have 70mm of the tenon inside of the leg and 70mm inside of the rail. So that's going to be an incredibly strong joint. So as you can see, the Festool Domino is a really awesome machine, but it is out of reach of most woodworkers. So as 99% of you are probably not going to have access to a machine even close to that, that bit of footage was probably a little bit useless. So now I'm going to show you the method I would use to cut the mortise and tenon joints as shown in the plans. So I've already cut the two long rails down to size, and I have allowed for an extra bit of material for the tenon, so that extra 110mm. So the first thing I'll do is I'll mark out the shoulder line of our tenons. And then using my marking gauge, I'll mark out the remainder of the tenon. Now, ideally, you want your tenon to be about the same size as your router bit, because then, well, cutting the mortise is a lot easier if you're using a plunge-based router. But if you can't get away with it, there is ways around it. Just make sure it's bigger and not smaller than your router bit. Now, in my mind, the best way to remove the waste is over at the table saw using your crosscut sled or your miter bar and a dado stack. But as they're pretty uncommon here in Australia, I'm not going to show that method, and, well, besides, my table saw can't take a dado stack. Now, the other power tool method I rely on is using the bandsaw. So just like I did the legs, I'll use the bandsaw to remove the bulk of the material. And then using my handsaw, I'll cut to the shoulder line. And then cutting the actual mortises on this workpiece is pretty simple. All I need to do is mark the location. I take that directly from the tenon. From there, I take my marking gauge and I mark the sidewall of the mortise. And then using my router, I'll plunge down to full depth of 55mm and remove all of the material. Well, I think we've covered more than enough in this video. In the next video, we're going to actually start working on the leg vise, because before we glue up this base, we need to have the vise hardware installed. So that's going to happen in the next video, and we'll probably also get onto the vise shop as well. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video and the entire series so far, give me a thumbs up down there, leave a comment as well, and all that sort of cool stuff, and also subscribe to my channel, because if you weren't aware, JordsWoodShop is a weekly woodworking podcast, so if you don't want to miss out my weekly videos, you need to subscribe. So click that button just there and stay up to date. On top of that, I'm also on Facebook, so head over to facebook.com/JordsWoodShop and you'll get lots of sort of behind the scenes photos and things before the videos come out, so it gives you a bit more involvement in the projects, I guess. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you want to buy these plans, head over to the website, JordsWoodShop.com, and you can find them there under the store, and I will see you in the next video.